Scaling and growing a startup can be tricky and sometimes even mysterious. It requires leaders to have a breadth of knowledge on company building strategies across marketing, sales, product, and talent. The Startup Guide to Growth was created to be the definitive podcast on growth strategies for startups. Hosted by Sapphire Ventures, we bring you actionable growth strategies that you can use to scale your company through insights and stories from accomplished operators. Ready to grow your startup? Then listen up.
All opinions expressed by podcast hosts and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of Sapphire Ventures, LLC. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes and should not be construed as an investment recommendation or otherwise relied upon as the basis for investment decisions.
Hi, my name is Rico Mallozzi, and I'm Senior Director of Go-to-Market Operations at Sapphire Ventures. On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Marie Gassée. Marie has specialized in building self-serve, online sales, and PLG go-to-market motions at enterprise technology companies, including Box and Confluent. On this episode, I explore with Marie the role of growth in enterprise tech companies, how a self-serve model can successfully work with other parts of the organization, what a good SDR compensation framework looks like, and the role of data science on go-to-market growth. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Marie, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You have a wealth of enterprise tech experience. Can you provide the audience with a little bit of background on the tech experience you have?
Certainly. I like to go way back. Born and raised in the Bay Area. My parents immigrated from France, so kind of have that connection. Early in my career, I worked at Cisco. Very enterprisey, entry-level marketing. Eventually found my way to Box, though, after going back to grad school. What was really cool about my experience at Box is I got to do kind of 3 jobs in the first 3 years as part of this rotational program. So I worked in finance on our IPO. I worked in sales strategy, and ultimately my third role, and then what I ended up doing for the rest of my time there was creating and leading our self-serve business unit. As a general manager. I spent 6 years at Box. And then 2 years ago, I joined Confluent as the VP of growth, looking after a few different things, but with a bit of a bias on the bottoms up go-to-market motion.
Awesome. I want to kind of go through the progression of your enterprise technology experience. And let's start with the role as GM, head of online sales. What did you define as online sales? Was it anything that came inbound through the website? Were you proactively driving customers to that? And what were the metrics you were tracking?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's actually not that straightforward to define like online sales or self-serve or growth. I will touch on kind of the really cool thing about that role was we had a wonderful org structure where I got to kind of bring together a bunch of different functions like design, product, engineering, marketing, analytics, systems, all with the goal of driving self-serve revenue. So our definition of self-serve revenue evolved a little bit over the years, but ultimately, we were really focused on customers who transacted online. So essentially, if they weren't signing a contract when they transacted, we called that online sales or self-serve. So very much, again, kind of the bottoms up go-to-market motion. In terms of what we tracked, metrics are the name of the game in this world. So a million different things, but, I like to think about it maybe a little bit of like a funnel view, like from pricing page visitors to signups to onboarding rates, upgrades, retention, et cetera. Our North Star, though, was ARR, so annual recurring revenue. So the idea is like we wanted to grow the pie of annual recurring revenue that we had as part of the self-serve business. So that takes into consideration retention, not just the acquisition of customers and the expansion. The other thing that we thought a lot about was how are we feeding the sales team? So we also tracked like what percent of new ARR that's contracted originated in the self-serve world. And that was a North Star metric for us as well.
What were some of the key levers that you were able to pull to kind of influence all those different metrics you were tracking and those North Star metrics?
Oh my gosh, so many. So everything from one of my favorite things to experiment with is pricing page, whether it's a pricing page or a download page or a sign up page. Like it sounds pretty tactical. but there's so much impact that we could have, like redoing our pricing page. And we did that at Box, which was awesome. And then as you kind of get, down the funnel, like onboarding, what is your users like first time experience in the product? How are you onboarding them? We did a bunch around upgrade flows. Like, how are you kind of showing your user different parts of the product that may not be available in their current plan? And then maybe letting them try it and then using that as a lever to upgrade. Retention was a huge part. So, things tactically like the cancellation experience, but really just like fundamentally understanding like what product improvements you want to make to, keep users being a little bit stickier. We can even go back to the very top of the funnel on the acquisition side, so many levers out in the ether, SEO and web optimization being one of my favorites. So that's what I love about these growth roles, about, the self-serve world as well, is there's so many like dials that you can tweak. And part of the challenge, I think, is like figuring out what are the dials that you want to tweak and you want to take, maybe some bold experiments with, but always thinking like what's going to be going to have the biggest impact. Like it's so tempting to maybe tweak a million things along the way. But I like to really challenge the team to think, okay, like what are the big swings we can make that are maybe a little bit more provocative than we're comfortable with, that could have like a huge impact on the North Star metric.
No, I think one of the things you resonated in that answer is we actually did a previous episode with the head of design for Datadog, and from a design element, he mentioned, giving the customer as full of exposure as possible to what the product can do to help entice them for that potential upgrade. So sounds like you said, kind of teasing on different features that you then may be able to upsell later on. I think is really, really key as well. I know today you're in a role titled the VP of Growth at Confluent. Could you give us a little bit more details on what that role entails? And then I would also love to get your perspective just of the growth role at enterprise tech. I feel like in consumer, everyone kind of knows like growth hacking, and a lot of people, social networks used it. But what is the role of growth in enterprise technology?
Yeah, I'll start there, actually. I will say it can mean anything. And I actually recently, you connected with and talked to VPs of growth at a variety of tech companies, just to get a sense of like how they structure their orgs, what metrics are most important, just do some best practices sharing. And the role really runs the gamut. I've seen companies where growth is like a customer success role, or companies where growth is, really just focus on the acquisition side, or what I'm seeing a lot of is the demand gen role is being retitled as a growth role, because maybe it's a little bit more of a sexy term in the industry right now. So the point is like growth can be anything. I'll kind of share with you what I view growth as, and then what my role is here at Confluent. So to me, like a growth role is all about like being super data driven. And really, to me, it's the intersection of like very quantitative and data driven and being a go-to-market function. I know that's pretty broad and still pretty nebulous, but those to me are like the two key like criteria that mean growth to me. I think actually, it's pretty like it works pretty well here at Confluent. So I like to describe my role at Confluent like twofold. So really thinking a lot about our bottoms up developer-led go-to-market. Which certainly is very much product led and self-serve in some ways, and then also a digital optimization across the board. So looking after our paid acquisition team, our webinars, our email nurture, et cetera. So really thinking about in all the different digital touch points, how do we optimize and how are we super efficient across all those touch points. But yeah, I have a line here. I said like an efficient go-to-market engine to drive pipeline and revenue. But then I just realized like that's so many jargon words in one sentence. But yeah, it's certainly a fun role. I'm really glad that growth of this is a thing now. It certainly wasn't when I started my career, because it really brings together what I find to be most exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. The second one you mentioned, description, is the one you put on the resume, right? That's
Yeah.
So I think at both of the companies, Box and Confluent, very successful from an enterprise sales motion, then folding in a kind of a bottoms up motion, a go-to-market motion. I like to say, as every company scales, either they start at bottoms up or they start at enterprise sales, but eventually they converge and they do both at some point, typically to just expand the market opportunity. What have you seen as the biggest kind of mentality shifts that companies have to make if they've already started with an enterprise sales motion and then are going to add that bottoms up sales approach?
Yeah, actually, what I would say is for both Confluent and Box, and for many of these open source companies, there actually is an inherent bottoms up motion. So especially, these open source type companies, like the developer adoption is what has made these companies. And similar for Box like to think a little bit more of a pendulum that swung, if that's the right word, started very bottoms up, like, hey, try the product, then maybe like swung a little bit on the enterprise, and then realize, okay, in order to feed the enterprise, we need a really thoughtful kind of self-serve business. And so what I view at kind of all the companies, it's less about like creating the bottoms up. It's more about like how you're harnessing that momentum. And to speak a little bit about the mindset shift that you really want to see, it's like, how do we use that momentum, not only to like, get adoption in the market and all that good stuff, but also to make sure there's a pipeline essentially to feed kind of the sales team. So at Box, for example, we thought a lot about, for our sales reps, how do we aggregate all the activity that's happening on Box that a company may not be aware of? Like, your employees are using the product, there's multiple deployments across multiple departments, aggregating that for the sales team, and then bringing that up to kind of the enterprise motion and using it as a key foothold into an account. So, I think about Confluent too, like we're not really shifting the natural dynamic at all. It's just, to me, about, continuing to focus on cultivating the product adoption. And that becomes a foundation for a sales engagement.
Mm-hmm. And are you primarily using like firmographic data to identify whether, hey, this should be a full self-serve sale, or this should be, or I guess it naturally happens too, or this should be handed off to our high touch sales team? How are you kind of demarcating that as they come through the funnel?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this in all my roles. To me, it's really like the customer's choice, and that's what we need. Like, you don't want to force. If someone in a Fortune 500 wants to transact online, maybe there's a line of business that just wants to start using a product, like, we cannot prevent them from doing that. That's counter to kind of like the fundamentals, I think, of these growth roles and self-serve roles. What I do like to think about a lot is like potential. So in terms of like, do we want salespeople spending time with a prospect? I like to think about, what is the potential value of that customer? And that's where, you make those investment decisions. Like, do we want to have this account owned by a strategic AE or not? Or is it, more of a self-serve account? So I use potential, and, you can measure that in a number of different ways based on the company, as a marker for, how you invest sales resources and customer success resources. But in terms of like where we direct customers or prospects in the funnel, to me, like any account, like getting a self-serve presence or a trial or whatever product adoption in kind of an organic way is great. So like, never really want to add any friction to that.
No, that makes sense. In the organizations you partner with from a growth perspective, product, customer success, and even sales, what are the types of changes they may have to go through to kind of embrace this kind of growth channel that you develop for companies?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that. I think there's probably 3 foundational shifts. The first one is that, just getting everyone on board that you're leading with the product. And so making it incredibly engaging, really easy to get started on. In enterprise worlds, that can be a little counterintuitive, that like you start with this frictionless, easy to use, like very kind of friendly interface. That can be a little bit of a shift. both at Box and Confluent, that hasn't been much of a shift, just because there's a lot of like roots in the user. So that's been nice. The second shift I would say is around usage. So like usage, adoption, consumption, activation, whatever you want to call it, like actual usage of the product has to be a priority for both your post-sales teams, but also actually your sales teams. Like one of the key mistakes you see is like overselling on a contract or too many licenses, and then you end up having potentially like a retention issue down the line. So making sure your customers are using the product and enjoying the product as soon as possible has so many downstream impacts, and so that's a pretty enormous shift. I think with sales, kind of the third key shift is for the sales team making sure that the self-serve channel is being viewed as a source of pipeline. The self-serve business, it's really an efficient way of acquiring like a lot of small customers, a lot of small deployments. And in theory, that allows the sales team to focus on higher potential accounts, selling $1 million deals or something like that. But you really don't want the two channels to be competing. And I've seen that in the past for sure. So making sure that, self-serve is viewed as, hey, we're in a really efficient way, getting footholds in all these different accounts. And then you can, based on the potential of that account, run with it and hopefully sell a giant deal. That positioning, I think, is incredibly key. Overall, what I love about this, though, is like, if you think about these three shifts, like they're so pure, like they're all of a sudden the incentives for the company are really to truly foundationally make your customers like get value out of your product. And so there's something so pure about that I love. It's like my metrics are going to look good if people want to use the product and are getting value from it and are using more of it. And that alignment of incentives is just, it's the best. And so that's probably one of the key reasons I love this type of function.
No, that's great. And I think another interesting point you mentioned is that early aha moment, because as easily as they came in the door, they can leave the product as well. I mean, totally. It's kind of like the double-edged sword of having product-led growth is, and cloud in general it's become a little bit easier to move vendor to vendor. So that wonderful experience and that immediate value, I think, is more critical than ever to build into your product. Totally. I know you've worked with SDR teams in the past, and one of the things that always come up with a lot of companies that we work with, and just in general, is compensation framework for SDRs. Obviously, everyone wants to create sales at the other end, but SDRs sometimes don't have full influence of it. So, are there any core pillars that you've seen in your work experiences that have worked well to keep in mind, whether it's just keeping it simple or other things of that nature?
Yeah, I love this question. I have gotten to actually get involved in SDR compensation, both at Box and Confluent. And so I get really excited because I don't know if behavioral economics is the right word, but I just think it's such a cool puzzle, aligning incentives but not overcomplicating. So I have kind of put together, I have my like core tenets of SDR compensation. So I'll share with you, what those are. So my first is it has, the compensation, what SDRs are being comped on has to be aligned with company priorities. So for example, if a company is really focused on, we need to acquire a bunch of new logos, like that should probably be one of the elements in the comp. The second tenet is simple. It's probably the most important tenet, actually. Like if folks can't understand their comp plans, and it happens all the time, like why do we go through all this trouble to put it together? So I like to say, like, you have maximum 3 drivers of comp, but ideally 2. So like, hey, you get 50% of your variable comp is on this metric and 50% is on another metric. But I've certainly seen companies like have so many nuances and elements, and then people just don't really know how they make money, and then you lose the whole point. The third is actionable. Like, you have to comp your SDRs on what they can actually impact. A lot of times I've seen companies comp on revenue, for example, but if your deal cycles are very long, the SDR probably doesn't have that much impact on revenue or the actual, when the deal closes. And so, making sure that an SDR can look at their comp plan and be like, okay, I can make an impact on these metrics. The fourth tenet is probably maybe the least popular. I'll say don't leave money on the table is what I call it. So I do care a lot about it because I think it's really important in a growing business. I think you often have a tension between sales and SDRs around, the quality of the opportunities that you're passing, for example, or the meetings that you're setting up. And I think that's a really healthy tension. But at a high growth company, I think I'd rather have SDR teams pass more volume, so we're not leaving any stones unturned. So that's a little bit of a bias I have. And then finally, the fifth one I'd say is just objective. Like the measurement has to be straightforward. That's something that can't be gamed. Easier said than done, but certainly worth calling out.
Yeah, SDRs and sales executives and individuals in general can get sometimes quite creative on how to get there. Very mission driven. Another area within growth that I know you've kind of overseen, whether it's at your current role or prior roles, is an activity you call customer lifecycle activities. How did you broken that down into like first principles? What is that? And what like departments within the organization does that work most closely with?
Yeah, I think so. Again, life cycle, like growth, could be like a million different things. I've seen it be, very top of funnel or like very full funnel. I'll use the product led journey, I think, because that one is the most applicable across companies in terms of how you think about life cycle. But I'll kind of share, the different phases, I think, of the life cycle in a product led journey. And the one thing I'll say is the levers and the teams that are involved kind of shift as you move along in that journey. And that's why the cross-functional piece is so important with product led. You have your website is a key part, your paid media team is a key part, your customer success team might be important. There's just so many teams that are going to touch these customers throughout their life cycle, and making sure that everyone's pointed in the right direction, fully aligned, just like so key. It's not sexy to talk about that. Like, obviously everyone needs to work together and be collaborative and be cross-functional, but yeah, I just can't emphasize more how important it is in this particular example. So the way I view the product-led journey, there's pre-sign up. So that could be a lot of what happens on, the digital media side, paid media side, on your website, anything to get people to your website and hopefully signing up for your product. The second phase I view is sign up to onboarding. So, you can call that first time user experience or onboarding. This is like when someone signed up for your product, how are they like getting up to speed on how to use the product and the value they're going to get from it? Then there's onboarding to activation. So, okay, someone understanding the product, understanding what the areas that they're going to use, that's one thing, but are they actually using it on a regular basis? That's probably the most important phase, I think, in terms of long-term value with a customer. Like getting them to use the product on a regular basis, that activation is so important. And, to your point you made earlier, that's how you get sticky. Like if someone ends up using a product day to day, it's embedded in like critical use cases in their company, then, you might not have a retention issue ever because the product becomes so core. Expansion is great. That's when, if you have a highly active account, then expansion isn't too complicated. What are the additional features that they might need or additional use cases within the account? And then obviously retention is, once you have folks using it, how do you get them retained in the product? I think the full view, the full journey, and having the incentives be on that full journey are really key. Like having one team focus on generating a bunch of signups and that team being disconnected from the team that's thinking about, okay, we want people to stay in the product. That's not going to work. And so really that whole view is what I think is ideally how you set the teams up.
So what's the key output for that team? Is it like webinars on new features? Like what is the key activities?
For which team?
For the post-acquisition digital engagement lifecycle.
Oh, tons of stuff. I mean, it depends also how you define acquisition. So if an acquisition is a sign up, then so much of what's going to happen is going to be, onboarding in product and via email, and maybe with a light handhold from a human or an SDR, for example. Or if it's on, you define an activated account as acquisition, then it's on, delivering more use cases, working on product features, kind of what we talked about, like showing other product features, maybe teasing them out and getting folks to maybe upgrade plans. So I think it totally depends. But to me, the key functions that are focused across the board on the journey, are the acquisition side, like the website, and the ads, for example, that you might be running to generate momentum towards the website. In product, so again, another hot function, product growth. Like, what are the things you're doing in your sign up flow, in your onboarding flow, your maybe activation checklist, your upgrade flows, and then you have often a digital CS team. So sometimes that involves people interacting directly, but sometimes it's automated ways to identify an account that's at risk, and are there like office hours that you can bring an account to help them, be more successful within your product? Or are there kind of emails, kind of an email marketing program that you can do to continue reminding people of the great use cases they can get with your product? So there's so many dials to move. I guess that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that digital CS team runs parallel to the conventional CS team, who is more of a high touch kind of customer success team.
Yeah, totally. In the ideal world, I'm sure I have a slide somewhere on this, it's a layered approach. So ideally you have this like really strong digital, somewhat automated layer of customer success that probably all customers get, and then as the accounts get bigger and maybe more high potential, more strategic, then you layer on, some of that higher touch. But to me, it's not an or, it's an and. So you just kind of have these layers that are thoughtful and not overbearing, but that you kind of pile onto each other, and that work in a cohesive way. Yeah,
I was going to say it's kind of critical that the transitions to each one of those layers is kind of smooth and not cumbersome, and that they're clean. So one of the other areas you're obviously focused on as a professional is demand generation. I think if anything has happened in 2020, it's kind of changed how enterprise technology companies have approached demand generation. What have you seen work or not work, and any potential long-term changes around demand generation just generally for enterprise technology companies?
Yeah. None of my opinions on demand gen are popular. So just a caveat.
Unpopular opinions, controversial.
Yeah. Just because I think I don't think I'm a traditional marketer. I don't even really identify as a marketer, which might sound crazy because I'm in a marketing org. But here goes. So to me, it's all about investment in tracking, measurement, and testing. So like, what are the foundations you need to put in place so that exactly what's working, what's not, and that you can test a bunch of stuff. So to me, it's like, we can no longer be in a world where you're just launching a campaign and then, saying, well, we don't really know what the impact is, but we think it's resonating. Like, that to me is no longer acceptable. And I love that now we have the tools and the infrastructure to have that accountability. So for me, what really works in the demand gen area is, I love SEO. I mentioned that. I think it's a little bit of a black box, but it's so powerful. ROI-based paid acquisition. So just being really maniacal about be able to understand, like, we deployed these dollars, it led to, these inquiries or these form fills, and then what is the downstream impact and what is the ROI? I think spending dollars without understanding what the impact is really dangerous. And that's when you get bloated budgets. I love website testing, love A/B testing. So anything you can do, testing a new pricing page, testing a new homepage, new CTAs. I think that's it feels tactical, but it's actually very, very impactful. And thoughtful email nurtures. That's something that, again, maybe not as glamorous as some folks might think, but just a really good email marketing program that's really thoughtful about the database, not being too many touch points. I think that's awesome. What doesn't work, if I might, I think there's a few things that I just haven't found to be that productive. Content syndication, I think it's a little bit of a thing of the past. List buys, I think people probably won't fight me on that one. Third-party prospecting agencies. I'm not a big fan of that. That stuff definitely can work, for the record, but I think you can use those calories and those dollars in a much more impactful way.
That's super interesting. On the paid acquisition front, I guess two questions. On the paid acquisition front, have you seen those dynamics changing? Well, am I going to start seeing enterprise technology ads on TikTok?
Totally. Yes, you are.
Really?
Totally. Yeah. Not that I'm not in that game yet. And trust me, like, I'm uncomfortable with it too, if I sense kind of your discomfort, but I see such great success on LinkedIn is kind of obvious. It's a professional, but on Facebook, on Twitter, I haven't launched Instagram in my roles, but I get targeted on Instagram now for SaaS, and I don't mind it. So I think like wherever people are, and now we're getting such great, I mean, there's certainly privacy implications, don't get me wrong, but such great intel on like, oh, here's a certain persona on Twitter or on Facebook, and being able to target them where they spend their time. So yeah, TikTok, here we come.
All right. I can't wait to see the creative TikTok advertisements.
I'm scared, honestly, but yeah.
I mean, I do like the billboards on 101, but yeah.
I do too, actually. We had at Box, we had a long-standing billboard. And like the day that we finally kind of convinced our CEO to let it go, to not renew, it was bittersweet. Because it felt like a really kind of, meaningful part of the company. Yeah,
it is. It's like a rite of passage. Our portfolio companies had a funny one segment on the 101. It said like, welcome to LA. And then it's like, this is what bad data causes, because
I love that one.
Calling out the wrong city. Yeah, it was great.
That's a great billboard. Segment customer here. So big fan.
Awesome. So one of the other things is, I wanted to also talk about, and I don't know if in any of your roles you've had this, but kind of the role of analyst relations in enterprise tech. May not have an opinion on it, but
unfortunately, I have opinions on many things I know very little about. I haven't had analyst relations under my purview. I will say, as someone again who can be opinionated and sometimes critical, it does seem incredibly powerful. So we had an amazing analyst relations person at Box. We have an amazing analyst relations program here at Confluent, and I don't fully understand it. But I do see that, analysts have an incredible amount of power. And so, being thoughtful of investing in that function seems to really reap some pretty incredible rewards. So that's one where I'm like, I don't totally understand it, but I respect it.
So on things like G2, which kind of position themselves as like a next gen Gartner, is that owned by your team, the digital acquisition team, or is that owned by another team?
That's owned by like our comms team. Yeah. Who has analyst relations, public relations, et cetera. Yeah.
Cool. One of the things that I think VP of growth, and it definitely kind of came out in this conversation we had, is it's very data driven. So can you talk about the role of data science? Do you have those people on your team? Are you working with data science teams that are maybe sitting somewhere else in the organization, and how are you using them to help kind of improve your processes and go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough like the partnership with whether you call it analytics or data science for these growth roles, for product-led growth, et cetera. It's incredible. They here at Confluent, they do not sit in my team, though. Having talked to a bunch of VPs of growth, there are definitely folks out there who kind of make that a requirement in their role. And I think it definitely makes sense. So yeah, partnership with a data science team is a game changer. So much of what allows us to know what we're doing right or not is the tracking, the measurement, the ROI, et cetera. And all that infrastructure is generally built by the data science counterparts. I'll share a few examples of how we partner with data science here. Like one project we did is understanding the dollar value of a sign up. And knowing that allows us to be really thoughtful about how we optimize our paid acquisition efforts to be ROI positive. So that was a cool project that we partnered with them on. Also on lead scoring. that can be a game changer. Lead scoring is often a controversial topic, but having a good partnership with data science makes it incredibly powerful. I will say I have a plug for our partnership with a data scientist is, actually working in partnership. I've seen at other companies, like it be a little bit of like, oh, can you just pull this data, do this analysis, just come back to me. And I think, that's gross underuse of the talent on those teams. They're not here to pull like last month's web traffic numbers or pipeline numbers. I actually think in the business, certainly on my team, we have to be able to pull those numbers ourselves. Like that's part of our job. But then in terms of data infrastructure, deep analyses to understand, what strategic decisions to make or how you want to measure your impact, or experiment design is one thing that we often talk about. That's where your data scientists can really shine. So yeah, I'm a fangirl of that team.
No, I agree with you, but like you said, having some element of self-sufficiency, right? So you're not overtaxing that group. You mentioned design experimentation, I think, just recently.
Experiment design, yeah.
Sorry, experiment design. What is that?
That is essentially when we want to do any sort of testing, when we're like, okay, we want to launch an experiment. Maybe it's one web page versus another that we're A/B testing, or maybe we want to test a different follow-up experience. There's so many nuances to how you structure and measure and actually get to a point that you can say, okay, this was better than this. And so it's way more complex than at first glance. And so really partnering closely with the team to understand, like, what are the populations we're sampling? Like, what is a success metric? How much time do we need to go by to be statistically significant? Because if it's going to take 6 months, like, we don't have time for that. And maybe it's just because I'm a nerd, but getting into those details and working with that team to understand, okay, we actually can't set up an experiment a way that we wanted to, because we won't actually get the answer. I think it's a really cool puzzle to solve.
What do you think is like a healthy number of experiments for a product-led growth company should run? Is it like one a month, multiple?
Way more. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different properties you can experiment on, on a certain web page, in product, in like your follow-up experience, in the subject line of your email nurture. So, a lot. I'd like to say we're running 10 plus at once would be great. Yeah. So we have, in some of our teams, we have like number of experiments per quarter we want them to run, but there's so many different things, to experiment on. So ideally there's just a ton happening.
That's interesting to kind of use that as a core KPI. Kind of incentivizes that continuous evolution. This has been a fabulous conversation on all things VP of growth in general as a role. And I think it's becoming, paramount in every company, because if you don't have a product-led growth motion today, you most likely are going to have one in the future. So I like to end these conversations with something that has nothing to do about the conversation we just had, although this is somewhat tangential, but just to kind of provide the audience with a little bit outside knowledge on you. What is your favorite? I'll give you an option. What is your favorite consumer or enterprise tech solution device today, if you had to pick one?
I feel so basic saying this, but Slack, at least from a work perspective, it's like completely changed how I work. It's wild. Like, I don't really check email very often anymore, which isn't a good thing. I do most of the
goal with Slack. So
but I mean, it means still people are still sending me emails. I should probably check them. So I do, most of my work in Slack all day. It's a little love-hate because it drives me crazy, coming back from a meeting and having like 150 Slack notifications or whatever. The other thing I'll say, like, if I may, separate from kind of the productivity tools I use, but just in terms of as a, professional and like what I like to use to interact with our prospects, I'm a big fan of web chat. So, there's a few like Drift or Intercom or Qualified. I just find it to be such a better way to interact with prospects, and a very modern way to do so. People don't really want to talk on the phone anymore. So a live chat, I think, is just a great alternative. So I'm a big fan of that as well.
Is that all human behind it, or is there some elements of AI?
I can tell you the way we do it. We don't do fake humans. Some companies do. So we have some like automation where it's, some kind of intro questions from the bot to understand like what you're interested in. Yeah. But certainly a lot of folks have like fake humans, where it's a bot kind of masquerading as a human until they get, maybe enough intent to warrant it being routed to a person. I'm not quite sold on that yet, but I certainly like the idea of, asking a couple of questions up front to get people in the right place.
Yeah, I think it's solution specific too. Like I literally purchased my renter's insurance by communicating with a bot on Lemonade, but it was like a simple of enough
totally
that I didn't mind it being a bot. Actually, I somewhat appreciated it that it was just quick and easy.
Yeah. Maybe I've become antisocial, but I don't really want to, if I don't have to interact with folks and kind of my own purchase decisions, I'm usually pretty happy.
Yeah, exactly. No, this was a really great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. And if people want to kind of connect with you, where's the best place? LinkedIn, Twitter? Where
Yeah, LinkedIn. I don't have much of a presence on Twitter, but shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Always happy to kind of share ideas and best practices. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Marie.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Startup Guide to Growth. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we invite you to visit sapphireventures.com for detailed show notes, additional company building resources, and information on how you can connect with Sapphire Ventures and our team. Please subscribe and rate our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Google so that other operators and entrepreneurs can find our show. And make sure to tune into next week's episode to discover the latest trends, techniques, and strategies for startup success. Until next time, keep building.